We're going to talk about, as the title suggests, how we tried to turn the challenge of the last 18 months or so into an opportunity and use that to kind of forward our agenda as an institution from a learning and teaching point of view. So the kind of agenda for the session this afternoon, if we can just move to the next slide, a little bit about the context. Some of you know something about Regents, but maybe some of you don't. How that kind of feeds into the context prior to the COVID pandemic and our development since. The support model that we designed and have implemented to help us through these big changes, and something at this kind of relatively early stage about the outcomes, both for the projects, but also for the wider kind of operating system, if you like, of the university, and then obviously time to share and answer questions at the end. So Regents, small private institution, London-based, about 2,500 students across a range of disciplines. You can see there: business, creative subjects, humanities, liberal arts, and psychotherapy. Our mission is developing tomorrow's global leaders, which I suppose is kind of quite common kind of theme, but you'll see that we're trying to put a particular kind of gloss onto that. An interesting thing for us in terms of where we started with this journey is Regents has had no online courses prior to the pandemic, so we had no experience that we could base our immediate pivot on, or indeed our future development in a kind of online and blended mode. We had before 2020 a small learning technology team focused on kind of reactive, responsive support for academics, but not really proactive learning designers, and that was something that we quickly decided we needed to change. From the spring of 2020, in common with most other higher education providers, we had to move completely online, and that's how we've been ever since, 100% online, with plans to be back on campus in the autumn, but we've spent the best part of 18 months 100% online. And the scale of that is that we have about 300 modules that we needed to completely redesign for online delivery. To do that, we had to support more than 200 academic staff in that journey. So before the pandemic struck in January of 2020, we developed what we call the hallmark pedagogy for Regents. So on the back of the arrival of a new Vice Chancellor in 2019, we were looking at our mission, our USPs, and asking ourselves, what's the attraction of Regents, apart from a beautiful location in the centre of London in a royal park? Why would students need to come to us? And we came up with the idea of needing to offer them something defined and differentiated from a learning experience point of view. So we decided we'd work on a new pedagogic approach with principles, and our starting point was graduate attributes. So what you can see now on the screen is the attributes that we would like the graduates of Regents to have in the future. So that was our starting point, and the way we designed this was via a sort of very highly participative process involving Lego Serious Play workshops. I'm a big fan of Lego Serious Play, as some of you know, and we socialized that across the whole campus. So students, alumni, professional services staff, and academics all joined an extensive process of brainstorming what we would consider to be the essential attributes, and this is what we came up with. So obviously, working backwards, if that's the kind of end goal for our graduates, how do we get them there? That led us to thinking about principles, and the ones I'd particularly like to kind of highlight now are the ones you can see. So fluency across the discipline, what Shaw refers to as the ability to zoom in and zoom out. So subject-based modules, but being able to combine them, and a transdisciplinary curriculum to develop global leadership attributes and skills. So that's one of the things that's in our kind of medium-term strategic plan. We want to embed digital communication skills in student learning, and we want to focus on real-world challenges as a kind of center point for learning experience. Obviously, the corollary of that is authentic assessment. And that was helped a little bit by the need to move away from formal examinations due to COVID. We also want a proper embedded industry offer and allowing probably some kind of an incubator to feed into all degree programs. And then a few things that may be a bit more special to Regents. Cultural and social versatility. We have 88% international students at Regents. So very, very broad mix, 140 nationalities on campus. So study abroad has always been a big part of our offer, and a wide range of language study available to all of our students. So that was what we were trying to achieve. We thought we would go about that over the coming months, starting in January 2020, and then of course in March, the pandemic struck and everything changed. So initially, like many institutions, our response was a pivot online, where we were using online tools mostly to mirror what we would have been doing with them in class. But because of our very high proportion of international students, it was really important that we could reach our students wherever they were in the world, which meant that we had to take an early decision to move completely online. And that early decision, which was taken in March, allowed us to get a head start and really start planning for what was left of that academic year and the academic year that was coming. We also had a real desire to elevate the learning experience, to make it absolutely central. And we used the pivot online as an opportunity to accelerate the implementation of the hallmark pedagogy, which is part of creating what would be the distinctive offer for Regents. But we needed it, in terms of its specification, we needed it to be able to deliver across quite a wide portfolio that includes liberal studies, as I mentioned, business portfolio, but also some really practical subjects like fashion, film, acting, psychotherapy, psychology, counseling psychology, etc. So we thought that the way to go about implementing the hallmark pedagogy at the same time as the pivot online was to look at learning design frameworks. And that's what we did. We looked at existing learning design frameworks. We consulted external experts and initiatives in other universities, brought them in from a round table. Lotte will speak about that a little bit more. And that led to us developing our own learning design framework. We also implemented a project management approach to dealing with the whole of the impact of the crisis and the pandemic on the university, but in particular, how we would deliver teaching online. And we had an online delivery group, which I chaired, which brought in all of the stakeholders, both the technology side, the infrastructure side, the facilities and learning resources side, and academics. We used pulse surveys to take the temperature early of our students' experience of the online. And again, Lotte will talk about that a little bit more. And due to the sort of time constraints and the need to do this so quickly, we started off by using mostly existing tools, ones that were familiar to our academics on our existing VLE, which was the Blackboard platform. One of the early decisions that we made was that we needed to mobilize our enthusiastic academics, our early adopters of technology and more blended approaches, mobilize them to support their colleagues, their peers in this journey, for many of our academics, online was a completely new experience for them. So the design support package we put in place for them included what we termed learning design champions. And that was one of the probably the more innovative approaches of our support approach to this situation. So our learning design champions, we can move to the next slide.
Sorry, Mark, it's not moving me.
Oh, stuck at the moment, are we?
Yes, there we go. Just there we go.
Great, thank you. So we went out and we sought volunteers among the academic staff, people who were somewhat pioneers in the use of online learning. And we recruited 8 academics who were then given backfill in terms of their teaching to be able to step up and devote 200 hours of their time to this role of learning design champions. The idea would be a kind of train the trainer approach. So we put all of the volunteers, the learning design champions, and ourselves, myself as head of academic and educational development, and Lotte as head of learning experience. We all went through a train the trainers kind of program, and then mobilized this group of learning design champions around the co-design of what would be a learning design framework. We decided that to kind of increase collaborative working and to dissolve some of the perhaps political kind of power and hierarchy in structures in the university around subjects and disciplines, we decided that the learning design champions would work across disciplines. So we didn't assign learning design champions in their own teams, but across into what at the time were other faculties. And we mixed up a combination really of one-to-one support from those learning design champions with group meetings, largely on Microsoft Teams, but also making use of email communication so that individual academics and groups of or teams of academics felt supported by their peers. We advocated a kind of coaching approach. So a lot of what the learning design champions were doing was asking questions that would help academics formulate their ideas and think about what they wanted to put in practice. But by their very nature of being kind of enthusiastic early adopters, the learning design champions also did quite a lot of explaining and modeling. So either showing their own VLE sites or getting permission from other colleagues to share best practice in that area. We really wanted to use the learning design champions as a resource to move us in the direction of our hallmark pedagogy, which is much more around active learning and a focus more on what the student does rather than what the teacher does. And the shift online and the implementation of a learning design framework really helped us in that journey. One of the things we did was to reframe student learning time away from the timetable in classrooms to include all directed and guided learning. So moving away from thinking of the timetable as just the amount of time that people spend with their tutor in a room somewhere. And then the learning design champions also did, to an extent, review the module builds on the VLE and offered feedback to academics in a kind of iterative process. And I suppose it's fair to say also served a bit as kind of early warning systems for us at the centre, where modules weren't built or where there were certain concerns. They were able to inform us so that we could support those academics to step up and design. And we quickly settled into a routine of having weekly learning design champion meetings where the learning technologists, later learning experience designers, and these learning design champions and ourselves met on a weekly basis to talk through good practice and issues and things that were coming up. So that was the who, and I'm going to now pass over to Lotte, who can explain a little bit more around the what that we did in terms of the learning design framework.
Thank you, Mark. So as Mark mentioned, we decided quite early on, largely due to the international nature of our student body, that we needed to make the shift online. So we knew that we essentially had the summer to make some significant difference to the learning experience. So we wanted to implement a learning design framework because we felt that we needed a tool that our academics would be able to use relatively easily, to use at speed, that would ultimately offer a higher quality and more consistent learning experience by offering that that structure and that scaffold for the module design and development. So in the first instance, we reviewed existing frameworks. We looked at what we knew was working out there at various institutions. I've spent the past 5 years predominantly working in online and flexible learning. So I was familiar in particular in recent years with the open source co-designs learning design framework, which was developed at Liverpool by Dr. Maria Toro-Troconis and colleagues. That was also, it's something that's been implemented in the online portfolio at Queen Mary. It's also used at Imperial. So we were relatively confident that that works for a number of different institutions and also across a number of different disciplines, which answered one of our earlier challenges given the mix of our portfolio. So what we were really hoping for was something that, as I said, would be simple, but that also would align with our own hallmark pedagogy, not least the desire to move towards a more active learning approach and away from the traditional lecture seminar format. So we reviewed a number of these frameworks. We considered which was tried and tested, and then we started to develop our own that was aligned with our own hallmark pedagogy. Once we'd kind of sketched that out, we then consulted external experts. So we invited Dr. Maria Toro-Troconis, as well as Leonard Ho, as well as Neil Mosley, into a roundtable event along with our learning design champions, who are also, as Mark mentioned, academics, to be able to discuss our initial ideas for the framework, what the structure was, how we felt it would be useful, and then took their thoughts and their feedback to enable us to then be able to make final changes before it was then launched, both to academics who would be using the framework with the support of the learning design champions, but also to our students, because we felt it was really important that they had that transparency around what our approach was going to be, not least to kind of prepare them for a kind of step change from what they'd experienced in March and April. And so they understood that yes, we were returning online, but the approach, the feel, the learning experience would be different. So in brief, the RADAR learning design framework that we devised, RADAR stands for research, acquire, discuss, action and reflect. As you can see by this table here, essentially we're looking to encourage lots more active learning, lots more learning by doing. The co-designs framework and by extension the Regents radar framework are grounded in the work of Diana Laurillard, her conversational framework, and also Charles Jennings' 70-20-10 model, both of which focus on, you know, kind of learning by doing and having the students actively involved in their learning. So there is a balance really that we were looking for between experiential, didactic and kind of collaborative learning opportunities. So whether it was researching through their own intellectual inquiry, or acquisition of knowledge through listening to podcasts or reading case studies, watching micro lectures of maybe 10 to 15 minutes on a kind of key subject matter that their tutor had produced, whether it was an asynchronous discussion on a discussion board or Padlet, for example, with their colleagues, with their peers and facilitated by the tutors, or then being asked to put something into action to test their learning and understanding by producing something or doing something and bringing that back within the online space for discussion. And also we encourage an opportunity, you know, each week, every opportunity or every unit of learning to have a point for reflection where our learners would be able to get some formative feedback as ahead of them progressing into the next week of learning. So the aim really was to utilise this framework to produce something that felt clear and consistent for the students. So at the beginning of every week, they could come into the VLE, they could enter the weekly learning folder, and they could easily see from start to finish how they could navigate their way through their learning. They knew what they needed to do, and they knew what was going to be online and what was going to be in the live session. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. So in order to encourage and enable our academic staff to be able to utilise the tool of the learning design framework, we had to put some additional training and support in place. In the first instance, we did an induction for all of our academic staff into the Radar framework. So we did a kind of workshop session with everybody explaining what it is, why we felt we needed it, and how to utilise it. Then we created a training course, which, as you would imagine, was actually created using the Radar Learning Design Framework. So we then put our learning design champions through that course as students, so they could see how they worked through all of the learning, they could engage in the discussions, they were asked to engage in activities. So we asked them to utilise the Radar weekly learning template, download it from the course, go away and map out a week and kind of share that back with the group for review and for discussion. On the left-hand side here, you can just see a couple of screen grabs from that training course. That was set within the virtual learning environment. So the learning design champions got to experience that firsthand. So not only were they learning about the learning design framework, but they also were kind of getting a feel themselves for how it would be to kind of work their way through it as part of a cohort. We also, at the end of that course, had an ideas wall where we invited everybody to kind of post their thoughts, not only on the kind of content that they'd learned from, but also the structure of the course. And we took that feedback on board. And then that course is archived as a kind of key asset within our Radar Hub, which was an online hub which is still used today, which was full of guidance from how-to guides around how to best record micro lectures, how to use tools like Padlet for discussion boards, refresh around kind of how to use the Blackboard VLE, adjusting assessments, for example. And we also had an inspiration section where people could download examples of completed templates of weekly Radar plans, for example, or see examples of modules and recordings, etc., that would hopefully inspire them within their own module. So that was just part of the kind of support package. In addition to that, we also had bi-weekly drop-in sessions that were run by the learning technology team. So if academics had very specific questions about their own module, they could drop in twice a week to have a conversation about that. But as Mark mentioned, kind of ongoing, they had the support of the learning design champion to be able to talk through, you know, once they'd utilised their templates, they'd gone through the training, if they had any questions or concerns about how things were going to map across, or whether they maybe were relying too heavily on more kind of passive didactic content, maybe rather than collaborative content or activities, they could discuss that with the learning design champion, who would be working across a number of different modules, so could kind of cherry pick examples of best practice as we were kind of going. And in our weekly meetings, the LDCs would be sharing that as well, and then would in turn go back and share that with the group. So there was a kind of a constant feedback loop there. And then this is obviously from a staff perspective, we decided to do a survey, because obviously it had been a huge effort by our academic staff, and we really wanted to check in to see how they were and how they felt about the process. And in the staff survey that we did towards the end of 2020, we were so pleased to hear that, you know, the respondents, the majority of the respondents, 82.5%, felt that they were well supported during what was obviously a very difficult and intense period when they were planning for their autumn term. So we were proud of that. From a kind of front end perspective, if you like, so within the virtual learning environment, what you would see is something along the lines of this kind of weekly learning flow. So the academics, obviously behind the scenes, were using the framework to map and plan their kind of learning materials, think about their overarching learning objectives, and breaking those down into weekly content and activities and resources. So if you were a student, you would kind of come into your weekly folder, let's say week 7, and you would have an introduction. So what's the topic for this week? And give you an opportunity to kind of clearly set yourself up on that journey, understand what you're going to be, what's going to be expected of you, and give you a few learning aims for that particular week. Then they might have something like a micro lecture, again 10-15 minutes, an overview of that particular concept, which might lead into a particular question that then encourages an asynchronous discussion in a discussion forum with peers facilitated by the tutor. There may well be additional resources, so this could be curated media, it could be a case study, it might be a podcast, for example. There might be a further micro lecture on a follow-up kind of concept. At some point in the week, which would vary obviously depending on timetabling, there would be a live session of around an hour, and we encourage all academics to use this live session for active learning as much as possible, so leaving the kind of core lectures to the kind of pre-recorded asynchronous micro lectures, to allow for that live session to be more of an open discussion, more of a collaboration, maybe using breakout rooms for students to use half the time to go and work on something collaboratively, and then bring it back for kind of a show and tell, if you like. And then ultimately there would be some kind of asynchronous activity as well. You can see here on this kind of Padlet board, there's some questions, there's some activities, there's some resources there that students are being asked to work through within a kind of collaborative Padlet board. And then finally an opportunity, as we've mentioned earlier, to reflect. Now naturally there would be some variation depending on the module, but this is the kind of general look and feel. This is an example here from our global perspectives module. So the outcomes of that were that, as Mark mentioned, we decided to do an early pulse survey to kind of take the temperature of how our students were responding. We received over 500 responses, which was a good response rate for us. 76% of students rated their online learning activities great or good. Further 16 rated them as meeting expectation. 82% indicated that the support from their tutors was great or good. And in our kind of ongoing conversations and collaboration with our student union, it was highlighted that there was a positive student response overall to the online learning approach, which, given that we didn't have any experience within this area at all as an institution, and we obviously had only a short number of months to kind of prepare, we were pleased with that outcome. So towards the end of 2020, we had about 30 seconds for reflection, it felt. But we did take that opportunity to reflect and think about what had worked for us, some of the changes in terms of the ways in which we worked, teams, how we interacted with each other. And we started to kind of think about the direction of travel for the institution, and any gaps that we felt we wanted to plug. And what we decided, amongst many other things, but this is the most relevant to our discussion today, was that we really did need to kind of bolster our experience within the area of learning design. So we created a learning experience hub, and we have learning experience designers who are learning technologists, learning designers, and the learning experience design really is that kind of combination of learning design and kind of user experience design. So we're really kind of user focused. So we're trying to put the learner at the center of all of our activities, think about what's the best possible learning experience could be, what impacts that learning experience. It's obviously not just the design and the development, there are all the other factors around the teaching and the support offer and the timing. We also brought into that hub the student success team. So that's our academic skills teams, and it's also our student achievement officers. So those teams are both dealing with students every single day, supporting them. And so the idea is that they're able to bring back into our hub the thoughts, feelings, barriers and challenges that our students are having, and then encourage the learning designers to kind of work together to brainstorm those out, essentially, so we can kind of design out those challenges. And then the last part and most critical part is that we've created a partner panel, which is very much about that continuous student voice. So again, thinking about that user experience, thinking about user testing, and whenever we're looking at developing a new approach, either at a kind of large scale or even right the way down to something really micro, you know, whether it's a particular activity or task in 1 week of learning, we then have our student partner panel that we can kind of put our ideas to and ask them to test and ensure that we're on the right track with that. I'm going to hand over to Mark for this slide now.
So yeah, just to kind of pull it all together, as well as the outcomes from in terms of the structure of the support that we offer and the outcomes from student responses to it, I think there are a few kind of legacy outcomes here that are really worth thinking about and sharing. One of them is that we've decided to keep our learning design champions role. So although they were initially recruited for a period to see us through the pivot online, we've decided that they're providing such a valuable service and that their role is so beneficial that we're going to keep them. So we've extended 6 of them, forward. The project and management approach that we use for the online delivery group has now become a kind of standard way of working in Regents, and we are embarking on a new strategic plan over the coming 2.5 years. And the project delivery mode is really modeled on the one we used for the online delivery group. Similarly, the way we encouraged participation from staff, academics and professional services staff through expressions of interest, we're now using that on a range of projects. So I'm involved in a curriculum model review project, and we've got 48 places for academic and professional service staff to express an interest and be part of those working groups. I think that at module level, the collaboration that was required to work with learning design champions and among teams is now becoming the default way of working in Regents after a very long period of people tending to work in individual silos when it comes to module design. So I think that could also be a really powerful legacy of this. And also in terms of the way we generate ideas, I think using much more of a design thinking approach where participative forums come up with the brainstorming, the ideas generation, and the formal committees do less of the generation of ideas and more of the formal sign-off of the ideas that are brought to them, which means that our committees are quicker and more efficient and more agile. And I think that the journey that we've been on with the pivot online and with the implementation of the kind of first stage of our hallmark pedagogy also has impacted on the operating system of the university as a whole. So we're using the metaphor of operating system, and we're thinking about alliances. So instead of committees making decisions where it's always the same people on a committee, we bring together interested stakeholders for particular projects. And that use of alliances, which we're still working on and growing, I think that owes quite a lot to both the participative process that we started on right back with the generation of the hallmark pedagogy at the beginning, and also in combination the project management approach that we've used to steer us through the crisis. So those are some, I think, potential lasting legacies from the journey that we've been on. And that's where I think we'll stop and open out to questions and any debate. Thank you.